Hello, BookTube. Well, this keeps happening. It's a little embarrassing. I keep declaring that the publishing industry is about to shut down for the season and turn out to go skiing or to the Bahamas, and then they bombard me with books. We got a mail haul earlier today that was a little on the thin side. No offense to the books that were in it, but they were great catalogs, but it was the whole stack was the size of what I'd like one book to be. I come back today and there's a bunch more, including a huge box. So we'll go through the mail again. We'll just see. This is great. I definitely want to keep my my bookshelves nice and plump for the new year. I don't want there to be a dearth. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. This first one I could probably have done without, but I'm going to have to read it. It's Victor Davis Hanson, The Case for Trump. He's a great historian writing a book called The Case for Trump. On June 16, 2015, voters met Donald J. Trump, Republican presidential candidate. A lot of those voters knew him already. They didn't just meet him then. And on that date, they met him being a racist and crass, coming down an escalator. As the 69-year-old flamboyant billionaire descended the escalator at his eponymous Manhattan high-rise, the self-proclaimed outsider offered no apologies for promising to be the first successful presidential candidate to have no prior political experience. That's often bandied about. I bet you can come up with, if you've been watching this channel, I bet you can think of a... Anyway. It's not a good idea. It's not a praiseworthy thing to have no experience for your job. It's the only example anywhere in the world where we actually are dumb enough to think that way. If you were wheeled into a hospital and needed a quadruple bypass heart surgery, would you say to the hospital manager, well, this is going to be a 16-hour operation. I'm going to be on oxygen the whole time, and there's a substantial likelihood that I will die. I'm really going to need your least experienced surgeon. No, you would not say that. You would not say that. That is not a virtue. Anyway, by the following November, Trump had triumphed over 16 well-qualified Republican rivals, a Democrat for the billion-dollar war chest, and a Washington establishment to become President of the United States. In The Case for Trump, award-winning historian and regular Fox contributor Victor Davis Hanson tells the story of how Donald Trump has become one of the most successful presidents in history and argues why America needs him now more than ever. Now, this could be publicity speak. This is the pub sheet. This might not be Victor at all. While there have been many books on the Trump phenomenon, they tend to fall into two categories: Make America Great hagiographies by Trump insiders or pro-Trump politicians, or anti-Trump screeds. With The Case for Trump, Hanson attempts something different, an effort to understand Trump on his own terms and to answer a series of questions by drawing on wider historical and literary precursors. And those questions are: why were expert pollsters and pundits so wrong in their predictions of a failed Trump presidential nomination, a loss at the ballot box on November 16th, and in its first months, a failed presidency? Not all pundits were wrong. You heard it here first, for instance. And they were wrong because they were lazy. They were being lazy. They were so caught up in the normal run of things that they weren't paying attention to 4chan. They weren't paying attention to the American Midwest. They weren't paying attention to the disaffected white vote. But why were expert pollsters and pundits so wrong about the president having a failed presidency in his first few months? He did. They weren't wrong about that. His presidency failed right from the beginning. The very first thing that his press secretary said was a lie. An easily demonstrable lie. The very first interview that he gave to the very first journalist that he brought to the White House, he pointed to a framed picture of his inauguration with the wrong date on it. It was failed from the beginning. It was never going to be successful. What's the next question? Is Trump a classic populist, a dangerous demagogue, or a barking P.T. Barnum, hawking the zeitgeist of the moment? He's the second. He's a dangerous demagogue. This is a man who literally craps on a gold toilet. He is not a populist. He doesn't care about the population. He doesn't care about ordinary people at all. He's never met them except to bilk them or evict them. The idea that he could call himself a populist and have the people he's fleecing praise him for calling himself that boggles my imagination. He's the second. He's a dangerous demagogue. He thinks that he is as he said himself, he alone has the solutions to everything. That's really bad. That ought to be automatically prima facie disqualifying for any office. If someone spreads his arms in front of the television cameras and says, I alone can fix it, they should be turfed immediately on that ground. What's the next question? Did events create the need for someone like a Trump, or did Trump, and only Trump, make conditions fit his own agendas? In other words, was Trump's rise due to his message or to the man himself? His rise was largely due to the fact that he was already known to the people from being a reality TV star. If he hadn't been that, if he'd just been a reality blowhard from Manhattan, who'd been bankrupt as many times as he'd been successful, I think he probably would have been shown the door. The fact that he was well known from reality TV allowed networks, news programs who have a higher moral obligation to abandon that moral obligation and just give him unlimited free time. All the time. All Trump, all the time. Any candidate, a carton of oranges could have won if it had been given that kind of coverage, blanket coverage. How exactly did Trump defeat Hillary Clinton? Could he have beaten any other Democrat in 2016? She ran a bloated and overconfident campaign. She viewed the nomination and the presidency as something that was her due. That was a fatal Achilles heel. It's unlikely that it would have doomed her campaign against a normal candidate, but it was still an egregious weakness. A normal Democratic campaign candidate would probably not have had that weakness. So it would have been fun to see. Here's hoping that we don't get to see it in 2020. Here's hoping that Trump does not run in 2020. And the final question, why did Trump's critics so loathe him? Did the odium derive from his checkered personal and business past? His business and personal past is not checkered. Checkered is... Oh, I'm sorry, I'm ranting. Oh. Checkered is not the word. Okay? Checkered is the whole run of Friends in a box set, and some of the seasons are more successful than others. That's checkered. Trump's personal and business history is not checkered. It's full of theft and bribery and the aforementioned bankruptcies and welching on bills. It's full of prejudice and bigoted firings. It's full of fornication, of unfaithfulness to a string of wives, and including the last wife, who's not an American citizen and who he bought on the open market for money, and he has the receipt for it. So that's not a checkered past. That's a horrifying past, a horrifyingly morally bankrupt and villainous past. His herky-jerky bombast, he doesn't produce herky-jerky bombast. He's a racist. He's a fascist. He's a sexist. Every word that comes out of his mouth is like that. There's a documentation now of direct quotes a mile long. The only reason that it isn't sufficient for a third of the American people is because nothing would be. This is your racist, crazy uncle. And everybody knows that. It's just a third of the American populace is okay with it anyway. Lock her up. What's the last question before we get going? This is the first book out of the bag, and of course it has to be something like this. His absence of a proper curriculum vitae, that's the last hypothetical that is floated for why he drew the odium of so many people. Because maybe he doesn't have a proper curriculum vitae. He was handed companies by his rich father. He ran them into the ground. He leveraged his name and a whole bunch of securities that he had no intention of honoring to get enough money to float casinos that he then ran into the ground. He ran properties into the ground. He can't run a business, and no one will lend him money. No bank in the country, no bank in the world, in the Western world, was willing to lend him money long before he ran for president. That is not the lack of a proper curriculum vitae. All of his grades at the very fine school with all the best words that he brags about were bought. All of the papers, all the work that he did there was fraudulent. Sooner or later, maybe in 30 years, the press will get around to figuring that out. All the books that were bestsellers were written by other people he isn't capable of reading. It's not that he doesn't like to read. He's incapable of reading. Watch sometimes when you see him in the presence of a document that he is acting like he's reading. Any of you who know adult illiterates, you will see all the signs. They're all there because they're true. He doesn't actually know how to read. Adult illiterates get very canny at hiding that fact, especially when they're this old. They know just how to do it. If Donald Trump doesn't care, of course, but if he ever wanted to disprove that, There's an easy rule. There's an easy test. It's the way that, for instance, prison literacy associations use to determine which inmates cannot actually read, because they won't admit it. Take a sheet of paper. Adult illiterates are very canny at the size of words, the length of words. They recognize some letters, so they know, if there's a capital word, a letter starting a word or starting a sentence, they know to give that emphasis. The key is to remove that. So take a sheet of paper and type everything in lowercase letters and remove the spaces between the words. Now, a literate person will have a minute of trouble, and then they will decipher it perfectly, and that'll be that. They'll be off to the races. An illiterate person will be completely helpless. They will not be able to read that block of prose. Give that to Donald Trump and see what happens. He cannot read. Watch him when he reads from a teleprompter. He guesses at the general shape of a word, often hilariously wrong, and then just smoothly says what his mind tells him probably was the right word for that place, although sometimes not. So the written transcript of his speeches after, the transcript of what he says, as opposed to the written script that he's supposed to be working from, is often gibberish. That's not the lack of a proper curriculum vitae. That's a fraud from start to finish in every aspect of his life. Here I am, foaming at the mouth. All right, so this is a horrible way to start the video, but I don't know how to cut this out. So I will leave a link. I will leave a note in the show notes to let you know to skip the first 11 minutes. So anyway, this comes out in early March, and one of the reasons why it's got me so worked up is because Victor Davis Hanson is a good historian, a legitimately good historian. So this book, I have to pay attention to it, even though it is fundamentally absurd. It's fundamentally absurd. This is not a case of politics. This is not a case of, I don't like the guy because my guy didn't win. This is a national disgrace. And anyone with a brain in their head knows that by now. A brain in their head and no dog in the race. If you've got personal, psychological, or religious reasons to believe in this guy, then you're going to believe in him no matter what. Those of us who knew him for decades before he got into the national limelight with his racist announcement of running for president because Mexicans are rapists, those of us who knew him before already knew what to expect. That was I've realized in the last 2 years, that was a very small percentage of the American public. The vast, huge percentage of the American public only knew this guy from TV. They didn't know anything about his background. They didn't know anything about the fact, what those of us in 2015 knew perfectly well, which is that he's billions of dollars in debt to the Russians. Billions of dollars in debt. He has no way of paying that. No one will finance him. So, except, vicious, strongman, fascist oligarchies. So, we all knew what to expect. You put something like that in an international limelight, and you're going to have a rough go of it. The only way that it will work for you is if you make nice with the press, and this guy's an idiot, so he attacked the press right away. Anyway, all right, that was disastrous. So, 13 minutes on the dot. I will leave a note in the show notes that you are to skip the first 13 minutes. But I ask you, if I have a hard time controlling myself with a normal book that flirts with the idea of Trump, then what am I supposed to do with a book by a legitimate historian defending him as the greatest president of the United States? I don't think I'm able to handle that, and I just amply proved it. So now we'll move on to smoother waters. This can't all be about Trump. Okay, all right, like for instance this next one. This is a big historical novel by Sarah Blake called The Guest Book. About a family that they're going to lose the island that has always been their family's retreat. I don't have a pub sheet here, but this sounded really good to me. 1935. Kitty and Ogden Milton appear to have everything. Perfect children, good looks, a love everyone envies. But after a tragedy befalls them, Ogden tries to bring Kitty back to him by purchasing an island in Maine. That island and its house come to define and burnish the Milton family year after year after year. And it's there that Kitty issues the refusal that will haunt her until the day she dies. In 1959, a young Jewish man, Len Levy, will get a job in Ogden's bank and earn the admiration of Ogden and one of his daughters, but the scorn of everyone else. Len's best friend, Reg Pauling, has always been the only black man in the room, at Harvard, at work, and finally at the Milton's Island home in Maine. An island that, at the dawn of the 21st century, this last generation doesn't have the money to keep. When Kitty's granddaughter hears that she and her cousins might be forced to sell it, and when her husband brings back disturbing evidence about her grandfather's past, she realizes she is on the verge of a family understanding of finally understanding the silences that seem to hover just below the surface of her family all her life. So the island, it's a familiar gimmick. We've seen it before, but it's often well done. The island will be the focus for this family re-examining its past, racist and anti-Semitic past. And it's a great, big, ambitious historical novel of a type that we're seeing many examples of for 2019. So this comes out in May, and I'm looking forward to it. I read the description already, and I like the sound of it. Okay. All right. Talk about historical fiction. A handful of you who know this series are about to plot. This is C.J. Sansom, Tombland. This is the new Matthew Shardlake novel. Look at the size of it. It's 900 pages long. This is, for those of you who don't know, this is a series of murder mysteries set in Tudor England and starring Matthew Shardlake, a hunchbacked lawyer. And they are amazingly good, just amazingly good. And they get longer as they go along. The first in this series was a normal-sized book. This thing is as big as a phone book. Fantastic. This comes out in January. I'm happy to report that I will be reviewing it for the Christian Science Monitor. Cannot wait. Cannot wait. I will read this, even though it's January, I will read this right away. Boy, oh boy. Fantastic. So let's do the plot a little. I don't have a pub sheet for this, but boy, oh boy. In Tudor England, lawyer Matthew Shardlake investigates the death of the Lady Elizabeth's royal cousin in the first installment. In this latest installment in C.J. Sansom's internationally best-selling series. Perfect for fans of Hilary Mantel. But we were there first, weren't we? Oh, remember how great this series has been. Spring 1549. 2 years after the death of Henry VIII, England is sliding into chaos. The nominal king, Edward VI, is 11 years old. His uncle, Edward Seymour, Lord Hertford, rules as Edward's regent and protector. In the kingdom, radical Protestants are driving the old religion into extinction, while the Protector's prolonged war with Scotland has led to economic collapse. Rebellion is stirring among the peasantry. Matthew Shardlake has been working as a lawyer in the service of Henry's younger daughter, the Lady Elizabeth. The gruesome murder of one of Elizabeth's distant relations, rumored to be politically motivated, draws Shardlake and his companions Nicholas and Baraka to Norwich, where a second murder is committed. As England explodes into rebellion, Nicholas is imprisoned for his loyalty, and Shardlake must decide where his loyalties lie, with his kingdom or his lady. And those of you who know the Shardlake mysteries will know just what to expect here. They are incredibly atmospheric, and they're very well hammered together as stories go. This author, the standard of murder mysteries is always the second murder. Orchestrating it, making it happen, making it work in the plot, and this author is really good at He's really good. He's good at the initial crime that starts the book, but he's really good at the follow-ups. Oh boy, I'm so happy to have this. Wonderful. The stain of the case for Trump has been completely removed. So let's hope it doesn't revive. Let's look at this next one, although it's all going to be downhill from here. An 800-page Tudor historical novel. But this mail does end in a box, so we'll see. All right, so this next one I requested. This is by Josh Malerman, who wrote Bird Box, which is a Sandra Bullock movie now. This comes out in April, and it's called Inspection. Kind of a nice, arresting cover there. Jay is a student at a school deep in the forest, far away from the rest of the world. J is just the letter J, not J-A-Y. Jay is one of 26 students, all of whom think the school's enigmatic founder as their father. Jay's fellow peers are the only family he has ever had. The students are being trained to be prodigies of art, science, and athletics, and their life at the school is all they know and all they are allowed to know. But Jay is beginning to suspect that there is something out there beyond the pines that the founder does not want him to see, and he's beginning to ask questions. What is the real purpose of this place? Why can the students never leave? And what else is their father hiding from them? Sounded like a lot of fun. I have not read Bird Box, so I don't know this author. But this comes out in the spring, and I'm eager for it. Let's see what this next one is. This is our last one before the box. Oh boy. Okay, great. I requested this as well. Talk about an arresting cover. I don't often say that about American versions of books, but in this case, This sounded fantastic. This is a debut novel. You all know how much I love debut novels. I especially love them when they are nakedly ambitious. When not for fame and fortune, not, you know, writing a Da Vinci Code ripoff, but rather where the author is pushing themselves. That's always nice. Even if it fails, it's always nice. This is by, oh God, Namwali Serpell. I hope I did justice. I'm sorry if you aren't watching, but I hope I did justice. It's called The Old Drift. Look at that cover. Huh? It will look like nothing else on the bookstore tables, and that's just what a good cover should. A good cover should look like nothing else. This is it's a debut. It's the first novel ever to tell the story of Zambia from its very beginnings to the present day and beyond. It starts at the majestic Victoria Falls. Victoria Falls is very, very majestic, and being up on top is very scary. Being in them is very scary. In the pools up there on the top, those of you there may be one or two of you who've been there. There are pools up at the top, right at the lip of the falls, and they're terrifying. You have to do it, but they're terrifying. Where there was once a colonial settlement called the Old Drift. In 1904, in the dining room of the Victorian Falls Hotel, a fever-addled British settler makes a mistake that entangles his family's fate with those of an Italian hotelier and an African busboy. As this era ripples over the centuries, the lives of these families keep converging. We meet characters like the girl covered from head to toe in hair, a blind tennis player with eye-riddled skin, a woman whose tears seem endless, and a group of astronauts who try to join the space race. The novel crescendos with a love story and a political protest in a brilliantly imagined Africa of the near future, filled with homegrown technological marvels from micro-drones to viral vaccines. Crossing centuries, borders, and genres, The Old Drift tells a sweeping tale of a small African country as it comes into being and the trials and tribulations of its people. Their stories, told by a mysterious swarm-like chorus that calls itself man's greatest nemesis, form an epic meditation on what it means to be human. And the author, let me see, I don't know if you can make her out. She's very young. Namwali Serpell is a Zambian writer who teaches at the University of California, Berkeley. She's run a whole bunch of awards, and she's published in a whole bunch of places, fiction and nonfiction, in The New Yorker, McSweeney's, The Believer, Tin House, Triple Canopy, N+1, wow, and the New York Review of Books. Great. Okay, and this is her debut. So that sounds fantastic. Sounds like it's going to take a lot of gambles. It's going to warp reality, and I love that, even if it doesn't completely work. And this comes out at the very end of March. This is effectively, you guessed it, an April book. So, boy, though, that's great as a debut. And now we get to the box. And it's big and it's heavy, so I don't know that it's come from one of you. That's just been my recurring fear in the last week, is that the box is going to be a gift. That one of you went to the... Ho, ho, ho. Ho, 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 ho. This is not just a book. It is the book. This is the Robert Alter translation of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, all of the Old Testament, in 3 hardcover volumes in a slipcase. Look at that. Oh, the best work of translation of the year, and I have now a gift set. Oh, the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and the writings. Oh, man. Okay, all right. Yes, okay, the stain of that first book is wiped away completely. God bless the people at W.W. Norton. So, all right, so there's your Steve Pyramid for you. We have the Bible. We have the Hebrew Bible. The entire Robert Alter translation in a gorgeous set at long last. Done at long last. Then we have The Old Drift, a very promising sounding debut. We have The Inspection by Josh Malerman, a mysterious school in the woods. We have Tombland by C.J. Sansom, the next enormous Matthew Shardlake novel. We have The Guest Book, another very good sounding historical novel for the new year, and The Case for Trump. by Victor Davis Hanson, who is such a great historian that it can succinctly be said he should know better. And maybe he does. Maybe he's laughing all the way to the bank. So, one way or another, I'll read the book. And believe it or not, I'll read it with an open mind. So he could convince me. In this isolated instance, alone among all the books that he's written, I know his subject much better than he does. So it's going to be an uphill battle to convince me, but we'll give it a try. That's the whole point of reading. So I'm going to go now. I'm not going to pay any attention to any of these books except for Robert Alter, but I'll be back. Thank you, Book 2.